Hello and welcome to Chasing Leviathan. I'm your host, PJ Wehry, and I'm here today with Andy Leaf. Andy Leaf is the senior pastor at Cornerstone Community Church in Iron Mountain, Michigan. He volunteered at an orphanage in Honduras when he was 19, and he taught English in China. And today we're going to be talking about how can spirituality help someone's health, specifically their mental health, but there's definitely that whole body connection. I think everyone understands that if you're struggling emotionally or mentally, you're going to have physical struggles as well. Andy, awesome to have you on the show. Also should mention you're the best man in my wedding. We've been best friends for a long time. Tell us a little bit about your journey and why, one, you're interested in this topic, but even how you came to be a senior pastor.
Yes. Well, thank you for having me on the show, PJ. I live in a region where whatever modern trends are going on, we seem to get them a lot later than everybody else. And one thing I'm working on right now is transitioning from working in a small church to working with a home health hospice team. And that's challenging my views on reality and spiritual care and even what it means to just really live the good life in ways that had never occurred to me before. One of the things that I'm seeing with the training I'm going through right now is people use a lot of terms and labels interchangeably without defining them very well. And that can really lead to a lot of embarrassment and even extra pain when it comes to dealing with people and working through spirituality per se.
All right, talk to me a little bit about some of those labels.
Yeah, so just the term spirituality itself. I live in the UP of Michigan, so the Upper Peninsula, and in the county I live in is the most churched county per capita of all of Michigan. In fact, it's actually one of the most church counties in the Midwest. Even though there's only about 7,000 people, most of which are related and highly tribalistic. So when I was approached with this job to be a chaplain, I made certain assumptions that pastoral care would be like chaplaincy care. And I found out nothing could be further from the truth.
What are some of those key differences?
The way that spiritual care would be defined as a pastor, especially with like pastoral care, and I work within a system of beliefs, Orthodox, Protestant, Christianity. There's a framework to it. There are expectations. There are ways in which I can be very effective, forceful, even judgmental, that are fitting to that belief system. But when it comes to spirituality within chaplaincy care, what I'm doing is I'm actually working to identify what the individual patient views as sacred. And in some cases, that is really tricky, just incredibly tricky. When I approach people, I do this thing where I have like a split second to either empathize with them or not. And if I don't want to empathize with them, I don't have the energy, I try to find a fault. And as soon as I find that fault, the wall's up. I can look at them objectively, coldly, but I won't be able to empathize or even reach sympathy with them, if you will. And when somebody has a framework or a view of life that is not religious, doesn't suit my own, it's very hard to empathize with them and work with them for me, at least with the background that I have. And I think it's kind of partially due to the area and culture I grew up in as well.
So talk to me a little bit. You grew up in Iron Mountain, right? You weren't,
That's correct.
You weren't born there, right?
No, I moved there when I was about 4 years old.
And so tell me a little bit more about the culture of Iron Mountain. You mentioned the tribalistic side of it. And tell me a little bit how that's shaped like your views on things like health and mental health.
Yeah. So growing up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, the UP as we call it, and being yoopers, it's easy for people to assume that they can understand it. It's rural, it's Midwest, but there's all these other hidden factors that they haven't been well documented, but you can experience them very easily. Like just to travel from one side of the state to the other takes about 10 to 11 hours. And depending on the weather, you can't even get from one half to the other half. So people are isolated, incredibly isolated. So friendships, relationships, your social well-being, all of that really depends on family units. And the family units don't do much together. They're fairly independent, and they really don't forgive. Like if you have a friend that's a yooper and you guys stop being friends, you'll never pick that friendship back up again.
Interesting.
Yes, that's just one of those for sure things. And since the population is so tiny, like you pick one smaller to mid-sized city in lower Michigan, and that's going to have more people than the entire UP combined. So there aren't many people. You go to the store, you go out and just go to a softball game, and there'll be like half the crowd not talking to the other half the crowd. And it's noticeably awkward.
And that's a regular occurrence. That's the way it normally is.
That's like going to Walmart every day. People shutting me in line. Yeah. And I'm fairly friendly too.
Yeah. What are some of the causes for that? There's the isolation. Are there historical reasons for this?
Yeah, you could blame it on ethnic settling. A lot of Scandinavian groups moved to do mining back in the day, and from that you can find certain perspectives on what it means to live a good life and to be a good person. And that's you're self-sufficient, and you don't take things lying down. You have guts per se.
Interesting, and because I definitely when you talk about the mining has kind of died out, correct?
It has.
Yes, and so it's also been an economically depressed region, and also there's really long winters, which are all factors for things like depression as well, right? Yes,
like there are parts of Scandinavia that are kind of as far north as we are, so it's good stuff.
That's why they felt
Negative
comfortable.
40 winters.
Yeah. No, I remember. I remember because for our audience, Becky Sue and I went to college up there, and I remember Becky Sue worked in the bakery, and she'd go out at 4:30 in the morning, and it would be negative 20 outside Fahrenheit.
Yes.
And she would go into the outdoor freezer to get warm because the outdoor freezer was 32 or something like that. People just don't understand. Like I had never heard of snow, it not being able to snow because it's too cold. Like that, yes. Like blew my mind. Or that the snow grips better when it gets too cold. So go ahead.
Yes, it's one of those places where you can impress people from the south that where I am in the winter, it's as cold Celsius as it is Fahrenheit.
Yes.
Once you get to negative 40, it's the same. It's just cold, and everyone agrees. It's just cold.
Oh, I was just talking to somebody who, I think I was podcasting with someone from England, and we started talking about Wisconsin winters, and they're like, "Oh, I think it's the same at that point. I've never encountered that before, but it's the same." Yeah, no, that's. Oh man, do you see anything? So as you. I'm curious where you want to go with this. Do you want to talk more about this systematic kind of that the system that you're entering in as a chaplain, or would you rather talk about the communities and how their mental health is formed?
Well, I think they kind of go together.
Yeah.
So this transition I'm excited about, education I'm going through, is happening because there has never been a hospice team in my county. If
not even a chaplain.
Well,
so I thought it was just the chaplain. There's never been a hospice team in.
There's never been a home health team.
Really?
For hospice care.
Okay, I did not realize that.
Because when you die alone. It's just what it is, right? So.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh, but
yeah, it is. Me being a yooper and then trying to make this transition into healthcare.
Yeah.
It's showing me that there are so many shortcomings and narrow ways of thinking that I wasn't aware that I had, and that's what I'm excited about, to be honest, PJ.
Yeah.
like you know this, most of my family is in healthcare. I have two brothers with their bachelor's in nursing. My dad has his master's in nursing. I was the only one in my family that didn't go into that.
Yeah.
So as I'm tiptoeing in very slowly, and things are short-staffed, undermanned, going slowly in this process, all my family members like, yeah, do it, go, and it's because I'm ignorant towards healthcare. To give you an example,
Yeah.
my brother was working on his favorite department floor, which was the ED. And my first response, no joke, was I had no idea there was an entire floor dedicated to erectile dysfunction. And he's like, no, Andy, that's the ER. It's been renamed the emergency department, not the emergency room. Like that's how green I am going into this kind of stuff. And some of it gets philosophical.
Yeah.
Some of it is really just the expectations that certain words create in people. And then some of it goes back to religion. So I'm really excited about this topic, to be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that you mentioned, you have that initial moment when you first meet somebody of wanting to either empathize with them or put your walls up. Obviously, for your job as a chaplain, I would guess you want to empathize, right? How do you?
That's the goal.
Yes. How do you find common ground? And I'm sure, like you. That's two different questions. How do you find common ground with the sacred with somebody? What are some techniques you can use, or what are ways of thinking that help you empathize with someone who's different than you?
Well, the first thing for me would be recognizing that my goal is to identify what is sacred for this person. And that's a huge world that I am not qualified to speak on as a professional. I am finding out that there are so many ways to see that because the world's a lot more diverse than the UP in beliefs, in cultural backgrounds, in existential beliefs and values. So as I'm working through things with these people, I have to prepare myself that first of all, my job is to identify. And I'm charting that, I'm recording it, I'm sharing it with the hospice team, what this person values. And then spiritual care from that point on is helping them maximize the relationship that they have with the sacred for as long as that person has, to help alleviate suffering, to bring them a greater sense of wholeness and also hope. Because if they're in hospice, it's because the treatments they didn't take. They moved from palliative care over to hospice, and we've got a job to do. And the slogan I keep hearing is, it's not about curing, it's about caring. And that sounds really easy to pick apart and make fun of. But the more they explain it, the better it sounds.
It's not about, is it hearing or healing?
It's not about the curing, it's about caring.
Yes. That actually makes, man, this has come up in numerous podcasts. I just did one with Dr. Richard Kearney, and his brother is a doctor, and they one of the things that the episode I did with Dr. Kearney was on physical touch and how important it was. And one of the things that has become an issue in Western medicine generally, and obviously we have it, is that we struggle when we can't cure, right? That's
Yes.
Something we're not good at, just abiding with somebody in pain. And there are different ways to alleviate that. And so, can you expand on that a little bit? What, as you've dealt with, and you're still in the training side of this, correct? But
Correct.
How do they teach you to handle and deal with death? Yeah, you can take your time on that one. That's
but this is one of those things where I have to admit, it's like if I had known this before I started the training, maybe I would have backed out.
Yeah.
One of the first things you want to work on is your own personal anxiety. And that's crazy to think about. But as somebody that does public speaking and performances, giving a good performance is often a high anxiety experience. It helps you prep and remember, helps with memory, delivery, all that stuff. But you bring that anxious persona into somebody who's in their last couple months of life. It's a recipe for disaster. So the first thing is you have to deal with your own anxiety before you can really help care for people. And the caring is identifying, recording, listening, not even necessarily correcting as much.
Mm-hmm.
And also recognizing that you have limitations in your role as there are limitations to everything.
Yeah.
It's fascinating that people assume if they're getting a certain kind of care that it's going to do things that it's not. Like chaplains can do a lot of great things. They can be a great support, but they're part of a team that's really providing alleviation to pain and dignity for people that treatment is no longer working for. And that's the hospice care team.
Yeah, I'm just...
So to answer your question...
Go ahead.
But
No, go ahead.
to answer your question, it's different for different people.
Yeah.
And like for me, being a religious leader, the more that their existential beliefs, the more what they view as a sacred has distinctions and marks that makes it more like a religion, the easier it is for me to deal with. But the further you get away from that, and that's rare in these parts, but there are some, when I come into people who have very eclectic views of reality, of values, the harder it is to identify what they need. And I have to admit that I'm limited that way and admit it from the get-go. So they don't have expectations of me that don't fit with reality.
Yeah. And that way it's different from even maybe the rest of your team, because the rest of your team, like human bodies, for the most part, share some characteristics, whereas I think beliefs, like you can't be entirely all things to all people. But something you said that just really struck me, and I think is very important, and this is a challenge to me, because I was just talking to my editor, Joe, and I don't even remember how it came up. But I was like, man, I'm just feeling on edge today. And he's like, oh, you're always on edge. And I was like, am I always seem like I'm about to like fly off and have a temper. He's like, oh, no. Like you're just always ready to go. You have so much, I mean, he just left it at that. But I know what he's saying. It like we talked a little bit more, just like I have so much energy and I'm always like pushing. That's what I do. And just understanding that a weakness for my family, and something, well, I shouldn't say it. My mom's actually quite good at it. But a weakness for me and my dad is that we struggle with this idea of healing presence. And that's really huge what you said, because I did not expect that answer at all. But as soon as you said it, I was like, that's a blind spot in my own life where I have to reduce my own personal anxiety, because at this point the psychic pain is one of the biggest things when someone's approaching the end, and to come in and to bring in this aggressive aura I'm like, yeah. And that's a challenge. It's a challenge to live in that kind of peace. Do you find any resources in Christianity that allow you to establish common ground when it comes to things like peace and abiding?
Sure. I think for me, meditation's been a big thing. Meditating on who I am and what I believe is really the good life. With people that, at least in the Midwest, when people find out that they have some kind of serious illness, the first thing I almost always hear from them is, well, I've had a good life. That's like the first statement. The second thing they say is, but I wish I could have seen my grandkids get married. I wish I could have gone to Argentina. They have these lists of regrets. And one of the things that meditation helps me with is, no matter what I do, my goal is that at the end of my life, I will look back and I won't want any other life than the one I've lived. That's the goal. And whatever it takes to get there, as far as, professional embarrassment, people not agreeing with me or caring for me as a person, not being important to the people I want to be important to, all of that just melts away. And people really do want to talk about regrets when they're dying. Yeah. It's amazing how often that comes up. So emphasizing what the good life is and talking to people about what they actually mean by that, I think there's plenty you can find from Scripture, especially in Ecclesiastes, about this. Why didn't you learn to fear the Lord while you were still young enough to enjoy life? Now it's kind of too late. And I don't say that to them,
Right.
but that's what I'm thinking through. And I'm applying it in ways that are respectful and nurturing to them.
Yeah. Is there, and obviously you can't go into specifics. I'm not asking for that. How does that kind of conversation go with somebody when they're dealing with regrets?
Oh, it's one of those things where you have to acknowledge that many of these regrets are kind of too late.
Yeah.
And I don't have to say that. I really don't have to say that.
They know.
But they know it. They know it. I know it.
Yeah.
And at that moment, I can help them try to maximize what they value that is possible. If they're looking for those kind of solution type therapy conversations. If they're not looking for that and they don't ask for it and it's not appropriate, the best I can do is just listen, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that feels awful. There was this nurse from Australia who gave like a list of top 5 regrets that her patients gave for like several decades. And they all came down to things that, to me, feel like no-brainers. Like men are always like, I wish I hadn't worked as much as I did, and instead focused on my kids and my companion. You go down this list. I wish I had maintained my friendships. They go down the list of these things. And in hospice, the best you can do sometimes is just listen, because you can't fix all those things, that late in life sometimes.
Do you find, so obviously abiding and listening are big parts of this. Is there any other practices that you generally find are helpful?
I think with what a hospice team does, explaining to people what they actually have really is helpful. But let me explain.
Yeah.
If you take the words like wholeness, holistic, and say, this is what my team's called an interdisciplinary group. Certain words sound more enticing than others. Yeah. Right?
Yes. Yeah.
Wholeness sounds a lot better than interdisciplinary group. It sounds terrible. It's not exciting. It doesn't fill you with hope. But the people who like to use those certain words have weird expectations of what they're going to get. So, like the moment somebody goes on palliative care, that's when they find out they have a serious illness. And palliative care is an orb of a bunch of different disciplines, professionals, people working together to help that person. Social workers, doctors, pain management, all those things are going together because people suffer in more than one way, but they don't know what they need sometimes.
Right.
Like take the wall down for a minute, engage your imagination, and imagine that in palliative care, they have people whose job is just to work with people to understand how the billing and the financial side works. Right,
because you don't want to add that psychic pain.
You don't. And you just have to stop for a minute and think, I'm going to leave my wife and kids in a matter of months, most likely, if I don't beat this cancer. My wife screwed up the billing. I come home from treatment, and I just unload everything on her in front of the kids. And that's how I'm spending some of my last months with my wife and kids. And you engage your imagination that way, and you go, what we have in healthcare is fairly holistic, but we don't call it that, because we don't want to give people the wrong expectation. It may or may not work. They might go from palliative care over to hospice. We may not be able to fix everything, but we are trying to treat people as people, and alleviate the pain as much as we can.
So if I'm tracking with you, like what you're saying, by using interdisciplinary group, which doesn't sound as good as like wholeness or holistic, but if you say wholeness, it gives people the expectation that they are going to be whole, and that's which you can't promise that.
No, you can't, and you shouldn't.
Right.
Like if you think of like a pharmaceutical commercial. I remember being a kid, and this commercial came on for this prescription antacid, and it's all these big New Yorkers at a buffet. They're like, "Hey, uncle, they're out of cannolis. and then one guy holds his stomach and it shows the animation of like the acid coming up, and then it shows the prescription drug, right?
Yeah.
And then the music changes and there's like birds chirping and all these Italians are smiling at each other and they're like, hey, they got more cannolis on the line. And then the commercial ended. And I remember my dad going, you morons.
Yeah.
And he lost it at this commercial.
Yeah.
And I was like, maybe 8 or 9 years old. I was like, what's going on? He's like, no. It's like, no. You just enabled these guys to kill themselves.
Yeah.
A little acid would have been better.
Yeah. Yeah, because you're masking the symptoms.
Yes, but the whole tone of the commercial was that you were whole and healthy when really you weren't. And that's a scary place to be within healthcare. I didn't know at the time that we're like one of 2 countries in the world that legalize those kind of commercials. They're illegal everywhere else to show prescription drugs on TV to the average consumer, because people shouldn't be making that that kind of decision themselves. And then that leads to the whole spirituality and therapy combination, which is just incredible in my mind.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So 2 reasons for it. One reason is that people want to combine spirituality with therapy is that it speeds up the process. 12-step programs do it. Medicare and Medicaid doesn't allow hospice teams to even function or receive any kind of money until they have a chaplain.
Wow.
And if you know anything about Medicare and Medicaid, they might not be the most kindly, generous groups in the world when it comes to paying. But they won't pay a cent for people who are dying if there isn't a chaplain on the team.
Interesting.
Yes. And the reason for that, as far as you can tell, is that with suffering, there is this spiritual distress that comes in, PJ, when people are undergoing loss. And that spiritual distress makes it so that any kind of care they could have received usually isn't as effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that just makes sense. Do you see, interesting that you're the first hospice team in Iron Mountain. When I say you, I mean you all, not like Andy is the entire team. No. But that you're part of this first team. Is there, I don't know enough about this to not make, assumptions, but I know that as a whole, America seems to be overprescribed. Do you see this as an antidote? Is that a problem? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I think you have more info on America being overprescribed, right? And how would this be the antidote to being overprescribed?
I think it all depends about how you present it and what your expectations are. I think in some cases, yes, we are. In some cases, you kind of go from the opposite extreme. Like I grew up in a home that we were self-described holistic people. We didn't take Vicodin. We didn't take even over-the-counter painkillers. How that shaped my childhood, man, is a few years before you met me, we moved to the area. My dad had some serious health issues with an autoimmune disease, and he was treating it just by like whole health foods, things like that. And my parents were totally convinced that they continue on that path, he would get healthy. You've seen my dad. He's bigger than I am, much more powerfully built than I am. He got down to 135 pounds when I was like 10 years old. Just, not the weight you should be at 6 foot, and a powerful build.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the people who were in that camp just couldn't admit that in some cases you needed to pivot and try a different path.
Yeah. Yeah.
My dad got on prescription drugs at that point for the first time, and he's still alive today. Before that, he was basically coughing up blood every morning. And you see that kind of stuff and you want to go, I need a little humility here. The holistic crowd, good, do your thing. The people who need medication, maybe you need it.
Yeah.
But the crazy thing is, PJ, is this. My dad would never, ever describe himself as being whole. He would say there were side effects to the very powerful drugs that I took that allowed me to survive, but I have an autoimmune disease. I will never be whole because so far, nobody can treat these. Nobody can cure them. You can alleviate the symptoms, live longer, and accomplish the goals you have for living a good life, but you're not whole.
Do you find that a helpful concept in what you do as a pastor and as a chaplain? The idea of,
can you repeat the question?
Is that the idea of like people are? I mean, and I'm generalizing here, but the idea that people aren't whole, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, so for instance, stupid example, nothing compared to an autoimmune disease, okay? But I think everyone has something, right? So I clenched my teeth, didn't realize what was happening, and I cracked my tooth, and I had it pulled the night before my 4-year-old, decided to come a week early. Thank you, Soren. And I got my tooth pulled the night before, or the day before. He came that night, and I was in the hospital with like gauze like up inside my cheek. You know, that tooth is gone. Like, I'm not going to grow a new tooth. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not, like, it's not, and that, but I think, when I talk about us not being whole, everyone has scars. One of the things we have to deal with, you know, even as you were talking about, and I would love to return to this, the idea of generational patterns in Iron Mountain, but just that, like, wholeness sounds better, but it can lead to destructive expectations. How, like, you've mentioned a little bit for being a chaplain. As a pastor, do you see has that been a useful concept as well?
It has been. A close friend of mine, his wife still has diabetes. They had their first son. He comes home from work, and his wife is passed out on the kitchen floor, and their newborn is underneath her. And she has smothered the newborn. She doesn't go to my church, but at the funeral, they do like a line where everybody goes up, like basically shakes their hand, almost like a wedding procession, but for funerals. This is for a newborn, and nobody knows what to say. The minister isn't there, so the first guy just says the first thing that comes to his mind. You know, God must have needed an angel, and I kid you not. Everybody behind that person in the line heard what the person in front of them said and repeated the exact same thing. And those were their answers, PJ. So when you try to give answers to things, like as a chaplain, when I'm dealing with somebody who has regrets that I cannot fix, nobody can fix. I can listen, but I don't want to do more harm than good.
Yeah.
And that connection between pastoring and chaplaincy has really stood out. You don't want to give people fake answers. And also getting into the chaplaincy side, seeing how spirituality can be seen more as a basic human need rather than something that fits into my religious system, that's been challenging as well.
Yeah.
Really, really it has been.
Yeah.
Somebody gave me this, it's like this 90-page report that the Vatican put out when I would have been in like junior high. And I found this really interesting. They gave it to me because of spirituality being used in ways that I, had a Christian, had never heard. And it was put out by their Council for Interreligious Dialogue. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise.
No, that's
but basically they took therapeutic techniques like the Enneagram and stuff like that, evaluated them in light of being good Catholics, and gave evaluations to them. And they called it the church's view on like the New Age. You can find it online. It's lovely 90-page article report. And one of the things they said is that sometimes when you try to combine spirituality with therapy, it just gets really ambiguous from their perspective of what they're trying to do as a church. And then they said, and I found this odd, the person that we blame for this viewpoint, PJ, would be a guy named Carl Jung. And then the report ended. As the only person they named as the reason that People in the West were starting to see spirituality as a basic human need, where before they never did. And it's a fascinating read. And I'm like, go ahead.
Is that a negative thing that he did that? How much did they talk about him? Did they just like say his name and they're like, and it's his fault, the end?
Yeah, and they kept going. like in worldviews like that of Carl Jung. It's like the only person they named. Everything else was like, hippie practices, the Enneagram. Nobody got fingered but him. And I started thinking about that a little bit. And I had to come to this realization, PJ, that my background and how the world views spirituality, they're not necessarily on the same page.
Yeah.
And it's not something new. I should have known about this a long time ago. I wish I'd read the report 15 years ago when it came out or something. And that would have really helped me understand my role as a chaplain, and that the way we talk about spirituality as a culture, it has broader connotations than religion. It's basic human wellness to most people, even to people who don't even like the term spirituality. And that's been a challenging journey and an exciting one for me.
How would you define spirituality outside of religion? What makes it spiritual rather than just mental, per se, like mental health?
Sure. I think the side that makes it spiritual is it's really about what you value, your goals in life. It's something people have, even if they haven't really tried to put it into words. So when I'm with those people who are not religious, who are, describe themselves as a nun per se, they get that chance to think about what it is that they view as sacred and spiritual. And sometimes they give things like, the reason or the universe or math or music or something like, I'm just like, okay, I got to stop myself from judging them and finding fault and just listen.
Yeah.
And it's so hard. It is.
Yeah.
It is, because that's not who I am.
Yeah.
But I'm learning to work in different ways with different people.
Yeah.
And it's so rewarding.
Yeah.
I mean it.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. So just I'll say for our audience, but I think I know what you're talking about when you say none. Is that like the box they check?
Yeah, not religious.
Yeah.
Or it's amazing that Medicare and Medicaid talks a lot about the spiritual but not religious people. Like they have articles you can find online one after another about that. And it feels like they're behind the times in some ways, but they make a really big deal out of that. People who prescribe to spirituality but not religion. And as a religious leader, I just want to mock the fire out of them. And I got to hold myself back and go, okay, but you're looking at it like this, and I can maybe imagine with my imagination a little bit what you mean.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, man. So as you're dealing with somebody in hospice, what is your responsibility to their family?
It can depend. If there's a family member that they have regrets with.
Yeah.
If they make some kind of request about certain family members, or if they have certain cultural or religious backgrounds that maybe I can't interact with some of them. It all depends. But I want to be sensitive, and I want to alleviate pain.
Yeah. Are you allowed to give advice that would help alleviate pain? Like, maybe you should try calling that family member if they're like scared to do it. Is that something that you can not necessarily intervene with, but you can advise on?
It can be, especially when we're trying to do that kind of talk therapy where they do want solutions. And sometimes it's hard to tell with people who are at the end of life. Sometimes they just want to reminisce.
Right.
And you can't really tell.
Right. I was about to say, I could see where so there's just a lot of judgment and wisdom and discernment involved where you're like, is this something where I push them to solve this? Or is this something where I'm just here to abide and to listen? Yeah.
And with the interdisciplinary group I'm part of, we have weekly meetings about that.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, I think they need this, or I think they're feeling this way. And everybody at the table can hear it.
Yes.
That's not just kept to myself.
Right. And you get feedback. That's really interesting. I'm assuming you get feedback, right? Like that's like people.
Yes. I'm non-threatening.
So do you see, as you get to see that last stage of life, And I know you're just starting on this journey. Are there habits, or do you see patterns of generational cycles? Something unique that comes from that?
Yes. Again, it's more a regional cultural thing, but you see people that haven't talked to their kids in 25 years. You see people who are entrenched in their certain religious views that are peculiar even to our region. And it gets me thinking that, if I understand the question correctly, it gets me thinking about how I'm going to evaluate what the good life is. I get back to that. I should be important to anybody I have a relationship with. If I'm not important to them, it's probably my fault, and I'm going to regret that. And I start thinking about things like that. Sometimes I even save them and use them in pastoral settings, like in church. But a lot of it I just apply personally because, there's privacy acts. I can't just, go share, so-and-so really regretted this terrible thing they did in their youth. It's like, no, I can't share that.
Right.
I'll get in trouble.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is its own sacred space, right? Like the deathbed is its own, I think that rightfully so. Is there any, as you look at your own kids, are there any lessons that you take away?
Oh. Suffering really does stick out in the memory. It really does. Negative, pain, all those things, that they really do stick out in memory, even of young kids.
Yeah.
And my kids are young right now. They don't understand everything. They're 4 and 2. But the reality is there are things that my daughter remembers very clearly from a year or 2 years ago because they were painful, and I don't want to add to that in ways that are unnecessary.
Yeah. Oof. Go ahead.
And also she remembers when I am not emotionally present because it causes her some form of pain. She can remember that from a year ago. Daddy, you were on your phone that night. It's incredible. And I take that to heart quite a bit now. Oh, man.
I run most of my business from my phone while watching my kids. It's that.
Yes.
Yeah. No. It's
you need to plug the production side of the show more, man. You really do. Like last month was home health and hospice month. And we had planned this show for then.
Yeah. There you go.
And then you rescheduled on me. and then you rescheduled on my parents' anniversary. And
is today your parents' anniversary?
It is. And they're not together anymore, for those of you who are watching. And for those who are watching, you gotta understand this about PJ. There's this Machiavellian cold shite that he lives in, where it's this world of 4D chess where he wants to talk about suffering and therapy, and he does this to his friend of almost 20 years, and just takes all his thunder. So I think you gotta plug that more, man. Let people know that you're really about that quality content.
Oh man. Oh.
You're welcome.
Oh my gosh, dude. Oh no, I know it's a heavy topic, and I appreciate you sharing. Sorry, I didn't know it was your parents' anniversary.
There's more than one way to suffer, man. Yeah. So we're proving that.
No, it's true. Yeah, and I just I appreciate the honesty, and even what that does for myself. That that comment about your kids and what I see with my own kids and how they can tell when I'm not present, whether it's on the phone. It's funny, you can tell when someone's not emotionally present without the phone. You know what I mean? Sometimes people are just off in space and they've allowed themselves to get sapped. And I think one of the biggest takeaways I take away from all of this is what you said at the beginning. I think it was really powerful. Is that we have to work on our own presence before we can be a healing presence for others. Especially from this more And then a lot of this going back to the episode with Dr. Kearney, but just we don't do well with things we can't solve, but there are lots of things in our lives that we can't solve, and just learning to live with that.
Yes.
I'd like to end on something a little more practical, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So as we kind of wrap up here, and what does meditation look like for you?
And again, this isn't going to be practical to most people because I'm a religious leader, and this falls within a religious system per se. But I really focus as a religious person to do apathetic meditation, and that's where you focus on negative statements that are true, not to know everything about everything, but to know what's a lie, so that your life is more truthful in how you live, in your habitus and in the goals that you set. So every day I get up and I say things like, God does not make junk. God does not make mistakes. And God doesn't change his plans for you and for who you're supposed to be. And I make those negative statements, and I meditate on them throughout the week or throughout the day. And there's so many of them I can make, but they always have to be negative statements.
Do you mind saying why?
Because the goal isn't to be right about everything. The goal is to be truthful. And I don't know anything about the absolute truth or all truth or exactly what truth is, but I know what it means to be truthful. And I know meditating on being truthful gives me so much more for my relationships, my family, for who I am as a person. And I think it makes the good life possible.
Yeah.
Where I look back and I don't want any other life than the one I've lived, not because I had all the answers, but because I had integrity.
Powerful, powerful statement. Thank you for ending with that. It'll be great for my production side of things, the quality content that I. Oh, if you can't tell, Andy and I are best friends, and he loves. We've always had this relationship, and I've always loved it. It's just, you have been a precious friend for years, and a real, both thorn in my side and joy. And so, I just
thanks. I think.
Yeah. Well, can I just say seriously, thank you for coming on and talking about something that's obviously near and personal, and something that you're working through yourself, and your just your honesty. I really appreciate it. Thank you.